back. We are live. Hello, everyone. It's currently almost 10:15. Today is Wednesday, February 12th, and I thought that I would continue to share my process for designing this self-portrait painting. And let me just close a door real quick before we get started. Be right back. Okay, I hope everyone is doing well. Thanks for checking out this video. If you haven't, I encourage you to go back and watch some of my earlier live streams from a week ago where I worked on this drawing. This is an 11 by 14 inch graphite drawing. I also, in the last live stream, had started this landscape sketch here, which I don't know if I'm going to continue working off of this idea. There are things I like about it and things that I'm already sort of past and probably will not incorporate into the painting. I feel the same about the larger sketch that I made a few weeks ago. So tonight my plan is to draw for hopefully only like an hour since it's after 10 p.m. And I'm trying not to throw off my sleep schedule. But to come up with at least two other concept sketches for this painting. And we'll see how things go. Let me just grab a couple of pencils and supplies. I've been spending the last couple of days doing a lot of plein air painting. I just returned from a recent plein air painting retreat, which was a lot of fun, and basically took a break on this project of the self-portrait painting. And again, if you're new to this project, this is something that I don't typically do. If I see a call for a juried show, I don't typically create paintings with that show in mind. I generally just make the work that I'm currently making, and then when something fits a theme or I want to submit my work to a show, I'll just pull from artwork that's already in progress or finished. Whereas with this show, there's a self-portrait show coming up here that's local to where I live, and the deadline for it is at the end of March. And, once I saw the call, I decided pretty early on that this was a show that I wanted to apply to, and it's been a while since I've made a conceptual and intentional self-portrait with a lot of opportunities for metaphors and symbolism and things like that. So all of that to say, I like the first two drawings to an extent, but I've been thinking about some of my favorite paintings by artists who work with self-portraiture. People like Gregory Gillespie, who I talked about in a recent live stream. Van Gogh, I really like a lot. Frida Kahlo is somebody else who I look at a lot when I think of self-portraits. And she was somebody that I recently Googled again yesterday and was sort of reminded of some of her earlier surrealist pieces. And that kind of got the gears moving again. And I'd like to make a few drawings tonight with some of that inspiration kind of from a fresh perspective. So what I'm going to do is create at least two of these drawing windows and come up with a few ideas and see what happens. So before I started the live stream, I created this really quick viewfinder out of paper. I have a video on my channel actually where I show you how to make these They're really simple. But anyway, this is the same ratio as my canvas that I'm going to be painting on for the self-portrait painting. So this is going to help me with my compositional process to keep things with the same dimensions or ratio, not dimensions, but ratio. That way, if I like what I'm seeing in my thumbnail sketch, it'll be, in theory, working as well when I scale it up for the painting. And this is a step in my process that I wish I would have thought about or, heard about a lot sooner in my painting career, because it's been a game changer in many ways. All right, so what we're going to do now is, I wonder if I can zoom in at all. I think I can only move the entire camera here, but maybe there's a way to swing us around like this. Apologies for the shaky camera work here. All right, let's see. But one of the ideas that, in terms of a sort of motif that I've also been looking at lately, are paintings that are set in bathtubs, where the figure, whether it's a self-portrait or a portrait of a loved one or someone else, they're placed in this bathtub sort of context. And I've always enjoyed those paintings. Antonio Lopez has a really famous painting of a female nude in a bathtub. I'm assuming it's his wife. I'm not positive. Pierre Bonnard has a painting, I think also of his wife in a bathtub. And then I recently came across a bathtub self-portrait painting by Frida Kahlo that I'd never seen before. And in that painting, she has sort of like a first-person view of her own feet in the bathtub, which I thought was a really interesting design and sort of arrangement of perspective. And so that's sort of sitting in the back of my mind too. And I've kind of been daydreaming a little bit about designing something with that type of perspective. So I think on this first one, I'm going to approach it in that way. I like this idea of challenging myself to riff off of another artist's painting, and use it as inspiration for something that can be personal to me. So I'm imagining, again, it's sort of a first-person perspective here with kind of a bathtub space. And what I really love about Frida Kahlo's piece, her painting, is that you don't see most of her body. The only part of her body that you actually see in the painting are her toes that are sticking out of the water, kind of like this. And then they're reflected in the water. And I like that play of mirroring that happens with the surface of the water. This is a very crude example of what I remember seeing in her painting. But this is just, again, kind of a starting point, right? And I could always take photos or do some sketching in a bathtub, I think, if I wanted to make this a little bit more convincing. But at this point, it's really just about playing around with different concepts for the painting. The other thing I love about what I saw in the reproduction online of her painting is that she uses this open space to enact all of these scenarios with architecture, with objects, with, I think, animals and people, if I'm remembering correctly. So there's this almost like this toy-like sense of scale to the things that are happening at this area of the painting and in the bathtub. And I like that sense of playfulness in her painting, and I think what can happen here in my painting, obviously, is to incorporate motifs and subject matter that I have relationships with, and I think that's where in the last drawing I made, I think that was sort of the initial idea, is that this type of composition would lend itself to embedding a lot of small moments and small motifs into the landscape. And I keep going back and forth. I like paintings that have a busyness, an overwhelming amount of narrative happening, that just take time to dissect and visually make your way through those paintings. I think of people like Bruegel and Hieronymus Bosch, these like big, almost like moralistic paintings that play out scenarios with bodies, and I like that moments can be happening that are totally separate from one another, but they're also going to connect through the context of being in one singular painting. So that's on one end of my kind of, sort of visualization of where this painting could go. On the other end, on the flip side, I also enjoy paintings that are very simple and paintings that don't have a lot of bells and whistles, and they're really just about the one subject. So my other concept that I'm thinking about is doing a close-up kind of like chest composition, where you'd see kind of like the nipples of the body here, almost like where eyes would be, kind of this close-up of the abdomen section of the body. I like these cropped close-up views in paintings, so this is another visual motif or idea that's kind of been sitting in the back of my mind over the last week. And I figure before I start the painting off of one of the first two sketches, I might as well take a little bit of time here and give myself some opportunities to maybe find something else, or maybe there's an aspect to what I'll do in these two sketches that will still inform the painting in some way. So let's see what happens here. Just sort of feeling my way around the composition, trying to figure out where I might want anchor points in the design, areas where I might want to draw the eye. And this can kind of be less about particular subject matter and more about the scale of things. Like, do I like the scale of a building or a house? If it was around this size. And this sort of plays off of the busyness idea of multiple moments coexisting simultaneously, but also, I'm thinking about scale and like if you were to think of yourself as a self-portrait made of objects, not of your own body, what would those objects be? I think that's an important type of prompt for creating artwork that can be more interpretive, right? It's like giving yourself some restrictions to work within, I think, can open up some pretty exciting moments in the process. So my hope is that, maybe this idea can remind me of some of those things where, you don't have to be literal with every painting that you make, or I don't have to be literal with every painting that I make. literal in the sense of like, oh, I'm going to do just a painting of my own body, and that's my self-portrait. I might still do that. I haven't decided the direction that I'm going to be taking for this painting yet, but it's just nice to keep my options open. For those of you who don't know, I live in Wisconsin, and I grew up in Wisconsin in the very southeast corner of the state, almost in Illinois. And I was raised on a small hobby farm outside of Kenosha, Wisconsin. And my family, my mom and my family don't live in that area anymore, but a lot of the work I made at the end of graduate school was a reflection on my upbringing and, sort of making sense of that transition into a new chapter, what felt like a new chapter in my life in terms of place, and thinking about how places generate such an important aspect to who we are, who we think we are, and contain these memories that we carry with us regardless of where we travel to. And even though that change happened like 5 years ago, I still, I think I still have this deep longing for that place and that part of my life, just that sort of feeling that you still have a lot of time and that your life is still kind of getting started when you're coming out of high school and going, when I started to go to college and, now this place has kind of become symbolic for certainly a nostalgic feeling, but also a foundational feeling that when I think of who I am as a person, this place very quickly comes to mind. And, there's a lot of values that I learned growing up in this place. And there's a sense of creativity and a sense of playfulness and a sense of adventure when I think about this hobby farm that I got to grow up on. And we were very fortunate that my mom created this beautiful home for us on 12 acres of farm property. And we weren't farmers in the traditional sense, but we did rent out our farm fields to local farmers who would plant soybeans and corn, and like 10 of the acres every year would typically have some sort of crop like that. And in the front 2 acres we had our home, and we had a couple of barns initially, but eventually we only had 1 barn left, and we raised various small farm animals like chickens and turkeys and pigs. We also had sheep. By the time I was going off to college, we had 2 donkeys and goats. I think that was pretty much the full variety of animals that we had. But because of that, because we got to experience what it's like to raise animals, I think there are a lot of life lessons that you experience. And as a family, I feel lucky to have been on the team that I was on with my family. So I look at images of sheep and they definitely spark that kind of, sort of innocent, but also familial type of symbol. I think there's just something about their form that's very comforting and visually comfortable, that kind of like soft, woolly, type of texture. I think it has such a comforting type of form, at least in the way that I've painted sheep in past paintings. But I mean, that's something that I could certainly see in this type of a concept. Just still trying to imagine my toes sticking out of the water here. I think I'm already starting to feel like maybe this won't be the design for my painting, but sometimes you just have to see it as a sketch before you can decide on things like that. All right, well, I think I'm satisfied enough with where that idea is. Let's go ahead and start this one down here. I think one of the things I enjoy about this idea of doing like a cropped section of the human body is that it really shifts the focus onto the textures and color properties and the very specific details of form that are just as unique as the portrait of the body, the head. And I like that this could be a painting that maybe draws a viewer in, but still has this sort of strange and off-putting or voyeuristic kind of feel. Like it feels like you're not supposed to look at someone's body this closely, and there's something permissive about making a painting that has that level of strangeness to it, I think. So as of right now, I think those are the kind of main reasons why I would be interested in making a painting that has this type of composition, that's sort of just like this close-up of the body. I think there's two reasons why I would maybe at this point not go with an idea like this. The first of which is, with this local show, this museum, I don't know how well, this type of a painting would be received. Not that that's a reason to not make the painting, but to submit it to the show might not be the right fit for a painting like this. The second reason, maybe not to make or to submit a painting like this, I was just going to say it now. I totally spaced on what I was going to say as the second reason. Is that it would be really fun to paint this from a mirror, from observation, but my studio is in our basement, and it just snowed 5 inches today. It's pretty cold outside this week, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any warmer in the next week. And I don't know if I want to sit down in the studio without a shirt on painting, so that's probably the more influential reason why I would not do this. But again, we don't know. We'll see. This is all just from my memory of painting my body over the years. If I'm sitting in a chair, my midsection has these types of folds in them, which, just as a formal thing, I like those little horizontal lines against these vertical lines of the arm. And I think in my mind, the other thing I could see or imagine is having some of these smaller types of symbols and signifiers, maybe some of my eggshells, maybe even doing something that's also very Frida Kahlo-esque, where there could be an image that feels like it's directly on the body itself, like in the chest or over the heart, or or maybe even doing some kind of an opening kind of cavity idea where the body opens up into a different space. I think that could be interesting too, and that's similar to some of the ideas that I've been playing with, where we get this idea of something being housed. I think that's probably the reason I'm drawn to these types of paintings right now, where they're like paintings within paintings. It feels like this part of the image is housing or containing whatever's going to end up in here. And that type of a relationship, I think, is really powerful when we think about caretaking, or we think about hiding, or we think about, what's public versus private information. This feels private to be able to peer into someone. I think that's, without getting into any kind of like explicit information, like that alone feels very powerful, and I like that as a visual idea. It's just a matter of deciding then, well, what to put in this kind of a space. I think that's where this painting is sort of, I don't know, it's starting to stress me out a little bit, I think, in the wrong ways, where I feel like, I don't know if I'm maybe getting too many ideas on paper or what, but I think that at some point I'm going to run out of time and I have to pick an idea and start the painting. And there's probably like 20% of me right now that would just like to start the painting and maybe do something like this, or set up a mirror and just start painting my reflection and then build the rest of the image from there. Like, I think that's certainly a great way to make a painting where you don't really know the direction you're going. And I think with these drawings, they almost feel like they're trying to be too scripted, if that makes sense, or like too directed. And I'm afraid to come up with anything in a thumbnail that feels like, oh, that's exactly what I want to do in my painting. And that takes away a lot of the mystery in the painting process. So, maybe I think there's a part of me that's sort of thinking, well, if I can make a bunch of these different thumbnails, then I don't just have one thumbnail. I have like, I don't know, 5 or 6 that I can pick from and pull inspiration from. Like, I think that's going to be really useful once I start the painting. The other thing I like about this type of a image is that it's pretty confrontational. Like, it feels like, again, it's sort of like, hey, look over here, and this is going to be a pretty dominant visual, image, because it's going to be so cropped in. It sort of feels like you have to sort of spend time in this area that might feel kind of uncomfortable. And again, this goes back to like a sensation. I think that's a feeling that to me feels pretty real, or familiar, like this desire to get people to look closer, sometimes at things that maybe they don't really want to spend time making sense of, if that makes sense. Just realizing that I think these initial nipples here were a little too high and a little too close together. One of the recent live stream videos that I did, I think I was talking a little bit about identity, in the painting, and whether or not to actually show my face in the painting. And I think I'm still kind of, I don't know, I'm excited about the idea of eliminating the face out of the painting and just thinking more symbolically. I like this idea of some ambiguity, or I was starting to think about this a minute ago too. I think that there's an interesting conversation that I feel like I hear a lot about these days, or I'm thinking about a lot these days, and that's this definition of masculinity, and what defines masculinity nowadays, especially visually. How do we picture a masculine body, and whether or not we would define as a group that a particular body appears to be very masculine. I think there's an awkwardness to that process of categorizing people, and joining people together through similarities or separating them through differences. And I think I've always been more interested in conversations that feel like they're less resolved. It feels like, well, there's aspects to the stereotype of this body that feel masculine, like maybe the hair. Like if there's a hairiness about the body, that starts to feel more masculine for whatever reason, and I think we could do the same thing with talking about age and time. What do we think of as being the markers of time? Would it be scars or gray hair or wrinkles versus a younger body? And I think self-portraits are a easier or more comfortable space, I think, for me to explore some of those conversations, because deep down it's like, well, I know it's my own identity that I'm portraying and experimenting with visually. And I also really like this notion that the body is flexible, that skin has a flexibility to it that can stretch and it can wrap around and it can reveal and contain. And it's this barrier that we see when we look at someone. And it's been fun over the years to make paintings that take the skin of a body and charge it with a type of expression that is physically impossible. There's a sense of magic, I think, that can happen when we allow ourselves to bend some of those rules of physics and life and biology and all that kind of stuff. And I think right now my interest is definitely in that type of a headspace, where it's like, how can I take a very generic image like this, make it feel personal and expressive to how I feel about life today, or how I feel about the future or the past, or both, or masculinity, or my relationship with my family, or my relationship to my neighbors. There's so many avenues that we can take an image and start to experiment with its form, and that's something that in my plein air work, I don't necessarily push that creative side to the plein air work. I think I'll experiment with things like color palettes and value compressions and compositions and abstraction, but I don't typically start to play around with the meaning of the form as much as I do when I'm drawing things like this or painting things like this. And I'm excited because it has been a while since I've pushed my process in this way. And right now I'm really excited about this drawing. I think this is certainly a contender for the painting. And I have a space heater that would help me stay warm enough to make a painting like this from a mirror, from observation. And I think that would be really important for the sake of the painting, is to paint what I'm observing firsthand. Just I think from the sake of honesty or legitimacy, and capturing the subtleties of what my body looks like at this particular stage in my life. In some of my other sketches and drawings, I was starting to hint at things like hair loss and thinning of hair, and those are changes that I've been experiencing over the last few years. And it's kind of a strange experience to watch your body change in ways like that, to see things start to become brittle or frail, or I don't know. does not feel fresh and new and limber and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I think that painting from observation would be really important for this self-portrait. If you look at my portfolio on my website, especially my studio portfolios, one thing that I think is a underlying thread is that a lot of the studio work I've made in the last 5 years has an ambiguous and kind of mysterious quality that even when I look at them, I don't feel like they had a direct concept behind them or a singular theme. You know, I think a lot of them were just, or at the time, they were experiments with making up or inventing subject matter that felt very unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. You know, I think that's a contrast or a type of tension that is very interesting to me, because I think it just makes it hard to pin down. You know, when we look at images that we kind of feel like on the tip of our tongue, we can define them and relate them to things that we are familiar and comfortable with. There's this other process that happens where we have to admit, like, hey, we don't actually understand this as well as we want to, and I think that's a pretty powerful experience too, to present a visual image that bridges a lot of different ideas, yet doesn't really solidify itself into one universal outcome. I'm more interested in paintings that are ambiguous. So because of that, I think it's hard for me to sit and be like, okay, this painting is going to be about this, and then I want it to have this, and then it's going to have this image plus this symbol to equal this interpretation. And I think this is where painting can open up itself in terms of the process to being very informative and revealing for the artist, where it's like, hey, I don't actually know what I'm trying to do. I'm following my intuition and I'm responding to what's in front of me, and then I'm deciding if I like it or I don't like it, or if it reminds me of something that I like or that I don't like. It's kind of straightforward in those ways. And I keep avoiding this contained cavity type of area here because I don't actually have an idea. I don't really know what it is that I want to put in there. I could see something that plays with scale, something that's really monumental, I think would be interesting to fit in this small scale context here. So that's one option. I think something that's very organic could be interesting. If it was a type of flower or bush or tree or plant, I think that would be pretty interesting. I'm hesitant to do anything that's like a figure or a portrait or too identifiable in a personal way, in like something that's like straight out of my house or straight out of my photo archives for my own life and experience. So I think I'm gonna have to think about this zone for a while before I can commit to anything. I don't have any historical references that I want to play off of. I named a couple of artists that I'm inspired by, but I can't really see myself borrowing any of their like images from their lexicon of or their vocabulary of painting, and I don't know, there's a lot to kind of figure out in this painting still. One of the other challenges that I'm finding is that because I decided to make a panel that's, for me anyway, it's a pretty unusual ratio. Like this feels, if I flip this and make it a vertical, that's a pretty long portrait style painting. But as a landscape format, that's also awkward to figure out a portrait, a self-portrait in that ratio. But the panel took a long time for me to make. It's almost done drying with the oil ground that I put on there before the weekend, and it should be able to accept the first layer of oil paint probably as soon as Friday this week. And that's why I'm kind of like, well, let's just see if I can make this ratio work, find an idea that I'm excited about and then run with it and see how far I get before I start to change something. But I don't know. I mean, the other thing I am liking about this idea is that it kind of builds off of a visual that I had explored in a plein air painting at the start of last year in February, so like a year ago actually, through the Art Servancy residency, where I set up this 22 inch by 22 inch oil canvas and did a portrait of a maple tree trunk that had this large kind of cavity scarring, almost like a branch of one of its large branches broke off and it left this wound that eventually healed in the tree. And I was drawn to it because it had really beautiful shapes and textures, and it read like a body. It kind of read like this, abdomen, chest, rib cage kind of a shape. And during one of the last, or over the last 2 out of 8 plein air sessions, I decided to paint in this square mirrored self-portrait. So this feels almost like an idea for like a sister painting to that plein air painting. So I could see this working well alongside that painting. I was also hoping to make 3 paintings for my Art Servancy project, and I only have 2 right now, so this could potentially be a good fit for that project. I was intending to do everything plein air for that project, but I think it might be kind of interesting actually to do one piece that's a bit more imaginative, less from observation of plein air settings and that kind of work. So it would be pretty cool, I think, if maybe there was a portrait of a tree in this space, especially if it's a tree that I have, some sentimental value with. Like there are 2 trees that I spent a lot of time around as a kid. One was at my mom's house. The other one was at my grandmother's house down the street. And neither of those trees are still around anymore. Maybe this would be a good painting to expand that idea of place, or that idea of memory, or that idea of childhood. And I don't know, the more I'm talking about it, the more I like this idea of the tree as a container for adventure, for safety, for exploration. It's this direct connection to nature if you're a kid playing in a tree, and it becomes a part of your home, and I think there's something really interesting about that idea. So I'm starting to talk myself into trying this out with one of those two trees, or maybe even both of the trees. That would be interesting if they were tangled together in some way, or there were two trunks. I think that would be interesting. And then there's the question of, well, do I paint and draw those from memory, or do I find photographs of the trees? Because I have photographs of both trees in my studio. Or do I look at the photos for a certain amount of time and then make the painting from memory? I think that could be interesting too. So yeah, I don't know. Things to think about. I'm going to keep drawing for 8 to 10 more minutes, and then I'll sign off for tonight. That'll bring us to an hour. But if somebody's watching this and has any thoughts on the concept for this sketch, feel free to chime in, or leave a comment down under the video, and I'll make sure to check out what you think. Trying to imagine what my abdomen will look like if I'm going to be sitting in a chair. There's typically this sort of like rolling of my stomach area if I'm hunched over. There's something interesting too about this like leaning forward, hunched over type of posture that feels very not like defeated, but it feels very vulnerable, or it feels very I don't know, to me it feels kind of welcoming, or it feels a bit like unprotected, or I don't know if that makes sense, but I can just sort of see this like leaning forward posture where it feels kind of like we're looking into someone, and they're giving full access to that memory, or to that place, And I just like this idea of, masculinity looking awkward, or looking kind of goofy, or looking kind of weak, and strange or weird, that kind of goes against a lot of American or United States, sort of stereotypes on being a man, being strong, being, not vulnerable, and being in control. I think there's an interesting type of sensation that I'm starting to feel about this type of posture of the body, that I think would work well with some of these themes that I'm talking about. And again, I don't typically sit and like write out a concept and then try to make artwork to fit the concept. But for the sake of the live streams, I think I'm intentionally trying to really share my thought process and, bring you with me on this journey of making this painting through all of these different steps and stages, like through the, you know, idea generation stage that I'm in right now, where I'm just trying to find what is the visual starting point that I want to use, that I want to use for the painting. And, what does it make me think about, and what's coming to mind? Why do I want to use a certain image or symbol? When I'm working, a lot of this stuff I think happens more subconsciously, and it's intuitive, and I'll often pause and then reflect and connect some of the dots. But by talking out loud, I think I'm realizing, like, a lot of this stuff, it's pretty intuitive most of the time. Like, I'm just kind of, I don't know, I'm having this type of conversation in my head, and I'm just slowly inching my way towards a direction that I think I want to go in, but I don't know what the outcome is going to be, and that's typically the way that I work. In my studio anyway. I mean, if I'm painting from direct observation of something, typically there's some kind of a pull towards the subject, or there's a reason I'm drawn to painting whatever it is I'm looking at, but I don't always have an idea of what it is I want the painting to communicate, in terms of an interpretation or a sensation that I hope viewers will feel, or that I as a viewer will feel. Sometimes the paintings are more like experiments, like it's kind of like, oh, I like the potential of what would happen if I did this in a painting. I don't know if that'll work or if that could happen, but now I have to make the painting so I can see what that effect is. I think I just have this desire right now to paint flesh. I think that's something I'm noticing right now about my work. I think maybe part of it is coming out of the plein air weekend with a bunch of my Wisconsin painting buddies. One of the nights we got to do some portraits. A couple of us painted portraits, and I forgot how much I enjoy mixing colors of the body. Even though they were just of the head of people who were sitting, there's a real satisfying feeling when you feel like you've figured out a relationship of color mixing that starts to resemble a human, in a human body. I don't really get the same feeling when I paint landscapes for whatever reason. I don't know if that's because there's a different type of life or warmth, or a sense of movement or personality that comes with painting people. But beyond just getting a likeness of a sitter, I think there's this other satisfying component to painting the body that, I don't know, it just feels tangible, and it feels ephemeral. I think that's something that I'm interested in trying to capture in paintings of the body right now too, is this ephemerality, this like temporariness of being alive and being this age and looking this way, that it's not going to last forever, and I think painting landscapes, because oftentimes I'm painting such open spaces that have multiple types of objects in them. Each object has its own timeline of life and how long it's going to be in that place. And with a figure, that's a singular timeline, and it's a pretty short timeline compared to some of the things I paint in plein air, and I don't know, I think that's probably why I'm interested in like trying to paint flesh. It sounds weird to say it like that, but all right, looks like we're almost at that hour mark. I might go for a few minutes still, just because I'm having a lot of fun drawing. The last thing I'll just talk about real quick is there's a painting that I made in grad school that was part of my thesis show, and there was actually there was a series of 3 11 by 14 inch paintings that I made. One of the paintings is in a private collection now, but two of them especially were fairly, I don't know, I would say complete self-portraits. Like they were of, my likeness, my like top half of my body. In one of them, it had a similar sort of head-on, very direct, confrontational type of pose where I was looking directly into a mirror. There was a like shirtless body, and in the body, like on the skin of the body, were a lot of these strange moments, like where, for example, in one area I had a lime, like half of a lime citrus, fruit or object that was embedded in the body, like in the skin. Like it looks like there's this little like pocket of skin that's holding a lime, and I could see dipping back into that type of imagery where it's like the body can also become a container for other objects, and other symbols, or playing a more creative card where it's like, imagining yourself as a character, and what would that character resemble for visually. And I think this could be an interesting composition to kind of dip back into some of those tricks of like, well, what if there's part of my dog's portrait embedded somewhere in this portrait of myself, or what if there's a tattoo of something, or what if there's like a name tag of something else, and I like that sort of bare, naked kind of side to this idea as well, where it's, if you imagine like a name badge from a job, that says like, welcome, how may I help you, and has your name on it. Like if that was just pinned to your body, there's this weird, corporeal, if that's the right word, painful type of sensation that starts to come to mind, like, or a patch or a sticker or things that are supposed to be on another, material over your body, not directly onto your body. I think that creates an interesting concept or narrative too that I could maybe play around with. I do know for sure that like the anatomy here is way off. This feels pretty cartoony, and though I kind of like some of what's happening, I like that it has this awkwardness. So I'll have to consider whether or not I want to paint, pretty realistically or not, once I actually start this painting. I mean, there's a pretty good chance this will be pretty close to life size too. It might be slightly smaller than life size. I think that could be interesting too. But yeah, I don't know. Right now, I'm definitely leaning towards this idea compared to everything I've been drawing. I also could see possibly having whatever's inside of this space coming out, or like hanging over, and entering the same environment as the body. I think that's a pretty interesting idea too, that maybe it could be incorporated into this painting. Get some of these like little hair textures in here. But anyway, I'll go ahead and start to sign off here. I want to thank those of you who tuned in live on Wednesday night. It's pretty late for a live stream. I figured if I was going to work on the project, I might as well go live and just share some of these updates with you. And my hope is that instead of just recording everything, with a video camera or my phone, and then editing videos and putting this into like a video format. I'm hoping with a live stream that, it's just a more unfiltered, direct way of sharing how this painting that will eventually happen came to be, and where some of the ideas originated from. I also today, another quick update here, I also stopped at a local library and picked up 2 different art books. It's not the library I typically go to, so it was a fun way to kind of, going there for a meeting with a mentor student that I'm mentoring. It worked out so that I could also check out some of their art books that I don't typically have access to. But anyway, I brought home a book on Leonardo da Vinci, and I have a book on da Vinci, but it's a sketchbook. It's like this thick coffee table book, but it's only on his drawings and I think some of his like engineering ideas and that process, and less about his paintings. So I'm excited to look at more of his paintings. And I've also brought home a book on Albrecht Dürer. I'm assuming I mispronounced his name, but he was a very famous German, I think, early Renaissance painter. I don't remember his timeline right now, but I've liked some of the work I've seen of his, especially mostly in books. But both he and Da Vinci have this like beautiful painting, glazing kind of painting approach with super, super subtle gradients of color transitions and this luminosity that whenever I'm painting a body or a portrait, I think their work certainly comes to mind. And I figured, why don't I just get a couple books on them, and then or once I saw the books on the shelf, I was like, yeah, I'm going to definitely bring these and look at them for inspiration. So we'll see if any other ideas develop by looking at their books that I brought home. And then I'm going to keep looking at Frida Kahlo too, and just see, is there anything that maybe I want to bring in terms of dialogue to this painting that I'll be making. It's tricky because, she, her life has a lot of unique stories, and her artwork is very personal and very impactful and effective at telling those stories. And it's hard to find things that I feel relate to my experience. There are some things that I've always felt I connected to with Frida's paintings. One of them being this sort of like Mexican American identity sort of space, like that kind of psychological space of feeling multicultural. And even though I have spent my entire life in the U.S. and most of that in the Midwest in Wisconsin, I don't speak Spanish, and I don't have a whole lot of contact with my father's side of my family, which is where my name comes from. It's where a lot of my physical features also come from. There's been a lot of conflict, internal conflict with that part of my own identity. And when I look at some of her paintings, I can sense that same sort of experience, I think, of figuring out who you are and your culture, and figuring out your relationship to different people in your life and places in your life. And I'm certainly going to think about that when I look at her work while I create my self-portrait painting. But yeah, I don't know. There's a bunch of artists that I think I can refer back to and just refresh my my inspiration from. I don't know. I think it's good. I think it's good to go back and remember what it is that kind of sparked a response in us as artists when we look at other people's work. not as a way to be like, okay, that's a great tool or I'm going to employ that, but more of like, oh yeah, that's a way to tell a story. That's a way to, construct a space, or, think about the body, or arrange space in a painting. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about this negative space. Like, this could also be a landscape or some sliver into a world that, expands the narrative of this self-portrait painting. So there's a pretty good chance I'll probably consider painting things into the background of the body here. But, I think that's probably going to bring us now to the end, since we're 10 minutes past the hour mark. I think this is all I'm going to show tonight. I will hopefully be live streaming again in the next day or two, and I will pick up where I left off. Thank you again to people who stopped in to watch part of this during the live stream. And thank you to those of you who are watching this as a recording on my channel. If you want to learn more about my work, I have my website down in the description of the video. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, I hope you'll consider joining my tribe of art appreciators. And yeah, just feel free to check out more of my work online. And I hope you'll come back to see where this project goes. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. So take care. Thank you. Actually, as I sign off, I might as well give you a look at the whole page there. So that's where I'm leaving you guys. Have a nice rest of your night and day, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.